The pristine, sunlit halls of Red Oaks Medical Center, a high-profile hospital nestled in the affluent suburbs, glistened under the morning light. The aroma of antiseptics hung heavy in the air as Angela Richardson, a newly recruited and highly skilled black nurse, adjusted her crisp white uniform and took a deep breath. Today was her first day, and despite the nerves bubbling inside her, Angela felt proud. Her years of studying, sleepless nights, and constant drive had all led her to this moment. A chance to make a difference. Angela had been meticulously trained, graduating at the top of her class and carrying with her a steadfast dedication to patient care. She knew her skills were exceptional and her compassion was limitless, but she also understood that being the only black nurse on staff would make this journey more complicated than anticipated. As she approached the nurse's station, an unsettling quietness filled the room. Conversations dwindled, and eyes flickered over her, assessing her with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something Angela recognized all too well: skepticism. She straightened her back, determined to make a strong first impression. "Excuse me," she said in her calm, professional voice. "I'm Angela Richardson, the new nurse starting today. Could someone direct me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse looked up, her polite smile failing to reach her eyes. "Down the hall, third door on the right," she replied curtly, her tone barely concealing the hint of reluctance. Angela nodded, maintaining her composure, and headed toward the office. But with each step, she felt the stares lingering on her back. It wasn't a foreign feeling. Angela had learned to expect resistance from some colleagues over the years. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the strength she came from. "Baby girl," her mother had once told her, "you're going to need to be twice as good and twice as tough as the rest of them. But don't ever let them see you falter." After a brisk knock, she was greeted by the stern, no-nonsense face of the head nurse, Miss Tillman, who offered a brief, appraising nod. "Miss Richardson, I trust you're familiar with our protocols." Ms. Tillman said, wasting no time with pleasantries. "Yes, ma'am. I've reviewed all the materials you sent over, and I'm ready to get started." "Good. We run a tight ship here," Ms. Tillman replied, her tone clipped. "I expect you to keep up." Angela nodded, understanding the implicit warning. Excellence was expected without excuse, and any deviation could be used against her. Following her orientation, Angela was introduced to Dr. Gregory Haynes, a senior physician known for his clinical expertise and his unyielding authority. His hair was gray-streaked, his eyes a steel blue, and his posture exuded control. "Good morning, Dr. Haynes," Angela greeted him, extending her hand with a confident smile. "I'm Angela Richardson, the new hire." Dr. Haynes glanced at her outstretched hand, pausing for a fraction longer than necessary before finally accepting it. His handshake was firm, almost indifferent. "Miss Richardson," he said with a curt nod, his gaze assessing her like an unexpected variable in a well-oiled machine. "I trust Ms. Tillman has briefed you on our standards." "Yes, sir," Angela responded evenly. "I'm fully prepared to meet them." "See that you do," he replied, his tone leaving no room for rebuttal as he walked past her, vanishing into the maze of hospital corridors. Angela released a quiet sigh, her resolve unwavering. She knew that her place here wouldn't be easily accepted. But as the daughter of a nurse who had faced similar struggles and triumphed, Angela had a legacy to honor. Her first shift was demanding yet manageable, but as the hours passed, Angela noticed a strange pattern. Casual conversations died down whenever she approached. Laughter stifled as if in fear of being overheard. She received clinical smiles, but little warmth from the other nurses, and her attempts to engage in small talk were met with polite, dismissive responses. As she finished her rounds, she overheard two nurses whispering nearby. "Did you see the new hire?" One whispered. "I heard she's, well, you know." "Yeah," the other replied with a shrug. "Not exactly a fit for Red Oaks, is she?" Angela's heart sank slightly. She had hoped the initial coldness was simply first-day tension, but it was becoming apparent that her presence here might be unwelcome. At the end of her shift, Angela gathered her things and made her way toward the bus stop, where she sat on the hard, uncomfortable bench. She scrolled through her phone, dialed her mother, and waited as the line connected. Her mother's voice came through, warm and familiar. "Hey, baby girl, how was your first day?" Angela took a deep breath, the weight of her day finally settling in. "It was challenging, Mama," she admitted, her voice a mixture of exhaustion and resilience. Angela Marie Richardson. Her mother's voice was firm yet compassionate. "Don't you dare let anyone there make you feel small. You've worked too hard, and you're there for every little girl who dreams of walking those halls someday. You hold your head high and keep going, you hear?" "Yes, Mama," Angela replied, feeling a surge of renewed determination. She ended the call, her mother's words echoing in her mind as she waited for the bus. The sleek form of a black car slowed beside her, a Mercedes with tinted windows. As it passed, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Haynes behind the wheel, his gaze briefly meeting hers before the car sped away. The interaction left her feeling exposed, reminded that her journey here would not be an easy one. But as the bus finally arrived, Angela stood tall, determined to face another day. She knew she was at Red Oaks not just for herself, but for a purpose much larger. Little did she know that her presence would soon be a catalyst, uncovering the institutional flaws that had lingered unchecked for far too long, and setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge the very foundation of Red Oaks Medical Center. The following days at Red Oaks Medical Center became a test of endurance for Angela. The initial coldness she had felt from some colleagues transformed into an almost palpable barrier of isolation, leaving her to navigate her daily tasks in virtual silence. While patients greeted her warmly, grateful for her attentive care, the subtle dismissals and whispered conversations among the staff left her feeling like an outsider in her own workplace. One particular day, as Angela made her rounds, she encountered Dr. Haynes in the hallway. He had a clipboard in his hands and was speaking with a group of young interns. Angela approached, ready to ask a question about a complex patient case. But as she neared, Dr. Haynes glanced her way, silencing her with a look. "Miss Richardson," he said, barely acknowledging her, "I hope you're not overstepping by involving yourself with cases beyond your expertise." Angela felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but she steadied herself. "Dr. Haynes, I just wanted to confirm." "I'll handle it from here," he interrupted curtly, dismissing her before she could finish. "Focus on your assigned tasks." Without another word, Dr. Haynes turned back to the interns, leaving Angela standing in the hallway, her question unanswered. She could feel the eyes of the interns upon her, each gaze a subtle reminder of her place in the hospital's hierarchy. Despite the rebuff, Angela persisted through her shift, doing her best to meet the rigorous standards expected at Red Oaks. She spent her breaks alone, used to the distant politeness of her colleagues. But on her way back to the nurses' station, she passed two nurses in the break room, their hushed voices carrying through the half-open door. "Did you hear? Haynes assigned the Richardson woman to Mr. Jacobson's room," one of them whispered, her tone dripping with disdain. "Are you serious?" The other replied with a scoff. "I heard he's been especially difficult. I wouldn't be surprised if it's some sort of test. I mean, Red Oaks is not the place for someone like her." Angela's grip tightened around the folder she was carrying, their words like an invisible wound. She knew exactly what they meant by someone like her, and it fueled her determination. With a steadying breath, she turned toward Mr. Jacobson's room, ready to prove herself. Mr. Jacobson was notorious for his outbursts and abrasive attitude. He had driven more than a few nurses to request reassignments, his demands nearly impossible to meet. But Angela approached his room with resolve, determined not to let his reputation intimidate her. When she entered, Mr. Jacobson, a gray-haired man with piercing eyes, glared at her from his bed. "Who are you?" he barked, his voice filled with suspicion. I don't want some inexperienced rookie handling my care. Angela steadied herself, offering him a calm smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Jacobson. My name is Angela Richardson, and I'll be assisting you today. I'm here to check your vitals and update your medication schedule. He huffed, crossing his arms. You better not mess anything up. I'm not in the mood for mistakes. Understood, sir, she replied professionally, keeping her tone steady and respectful. She began to work efficiently, checking his pulse and adjusting his IV, all while ignoring his grumbling remarks. She'd encountered difficult patients before, but Mr. Jacobson's vitriol was different. There was an underlying resentment in his voice, an unspoken challenge. As Angela finished up, Mr. Jacobson eyed her suspiciously. You seem too nice to be here. Just don't mess anything up, and we'll be fine. Angela kept her composure, thanking him before stepping out. But as she left his room, her heart sank. She was doing everything she could, yet she felt constantly tested, her competence questioned at every turn. Still, she held on to the hope that her professionalism and dedication would eventually win her colleagues' respect. Later that afternoon, Angela encountered another colleague, Nurse Emily Lawson, in the break room. Emily, a young nurse with kind eyes, was one of the few staff members who had been polite, even friendly, with Angela. She offered Angela a warm smile as she poured herself a cup of coffee. Hey, Angela, Emily greeted her. How's your day going? Angela returned the smile, grateful for the brief respite. It's been interesting, she replied, her tone light but honest. Emily nodded, her gaze sympathetic. I know it's probably not been easy settling in here. Red Oaks has its quirks, to say the least. Quirks. Angela chuckled softly, raising an eyebrow. Well, Emily hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. I think you've noticed by now that there are some people here who aren't exactly open-minded. Angela felt a weight lift slightly as she listened, relieved to hear someone acknowledge what she had been feeling. It's hard not to notice, she admitted. I just didn't expect it to be so overt. Emily sighed, her expression pained. It's something a lot of us know about, but very few of us actually talk about. And I hate to say it, but Dr. Haynes is known for making certain people feel unwelcome. He's practically an institution around here, though, so people tend to look the other way. Angela's jaw tightened. I appreciate your honesty, Emily. It's good to know I'm not imagining things. Emily placed a reassuring hand on Angela's arm. You're not. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing a great job. Don't let them get to you. Angela managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Dr. Haynes' voice down the hallway, his commanding tone unmistakable. Angela's brief reprieve faded as she headed back to her duties, bracing herself for whatever challenge lay ahead. As the days wore on, Angela found herself facing increasingly difficult assignments. Dr. Haynes seemed to take a particular interest in assigning her to challenging patients, often watching her from a distance, as if waiting for her to slip up. Each shift was a marathon of complex cases, her workload noticeably heavier than her colleagues. One evening, Angela was assigned to assist in a minor surgical procedure. She scrubbed in, preparing herself with meticulous care. As she stood beside Dr. Haynes, she couldn't ignore the tension radiating from him. His gaze was steely, his movements precise but rigid. Midway through the procedure, Angela noticed Dr. Haynes was about to make an incision at an unusual angle, one that could potentially harm a nearby nerve. Her heart raced. Should she speak up? The stakes were high, but patient safety was her priority. Summoning her courage, she spoke softly, her voice steady. Dr. Haynes, if I may, I think the incision might be safer from a slightly different angle. It would protect the nerve just here. Dr. Haynes' eyes snapped to hers, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. The tension in the room intensified, and for a moment, Angela feared she had overstepped. But instead of responding, Dr. Haynes adjusted his angle slightly, carrying on without a word. The procedure concluded successfully, though the atmosphere remained charged. As they finished, Dr. Haynes turned to her, his voice barely concealing his disdain. "Miss Richardson, I trust you'll refrain from making unsolicited suggestions in the future. I know how to perform my job." Angela bit back her response, her professionalism taking precedence over her frustration. "Understood, Dr. Haynes." After the procedure, Angela gathered her things, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. But just as she was about to leave, Dr. Haynes' voice called out from down the hallway. "Nurse Richardson." She turned to face him, her expression neutral. Dr. Haynes approached her, his demeanor cold and unyielding. "You may think that speaking up will earn you respect, but this is Red Oaks, not some teaching hospital. If you can't keep your opinions to yourself, you might find yourself replaced." Angela's resolve hardened. She could see the disdain in his eyes, the unspoken message that her presence was unwelcome. But she also knew that backing down was not an option. She had come too far, fought too hard, to let anyone push her out. "Understood, Dr. Haynes," she replied, her tone steady. As she walked away, she felt a surge of determination rise within her. Red Oaks might be a challenging environment, but Angela was no stranger to adversity. She knew that her skills, her compassion, and her resilience would ultimately prove her worth, no matter how much resistance she faced. Unbeknownst to her, a patient had been observing her interactions from his hospital room, a patient whose presence would soon become pivotal. Mr. Thomas Edwards, a man of quiet authority, had watched the exchange between Angela and Dr. Haynes, his sharp gaze noting every detail. To most, he was just another patient, but Mr. Edwards had come to Red Oaks not just for care, but for a purpose, and Angela's struggle had caught his attention. A shift was brewing in Red Oaks Medical Center, one that would reveal the true nature of its pristine facade. Angela's presence was more than just a new hire. It was the spark that would ignite a long-overdue reckoning, and Mr. Edwards was watching, ready to act. The following week at Red Oaks Medical Center was grueling for Angela. Her days became an exhausting cycle of heavy patient loads, late nights, and a growing sense of isolation among her colleagues. Although she had earned the respect and gratitude of many of her patients, the atmosphere around her remained cold, a continuous reminder of how unwelcome she was among certain staff members. One afternoon, while checking her schedule, Angela noticed an unusual assignment, a private room reserved for a VIP patient. This assignment was typically managed by the senior nursing staff, a task reserved for the most experienced. Angela's brow furrowed in surprise. This wasn't the kind of assignment usually given to someone in her position, especially not someone new and under constant scrutiny. She suspected this was another one of Dr. Haynes' subtle tests, a way to burden her with high-stakes responsibilities while waiting for her to fail. Nevertheless, Angela took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and made her way to room 310. She knocked softly and entered, only to be met by the intense gaze of a distinguished-looking man sitting upright in bed. His arms were both in casts, and his expression, though calm, carried a sharpness that was hard to ignore. "Good afternoon," Angela said with her usual warmth. "My name is Angela Richardson. I'll be your nurse today. How are you feeling?" The man's assessing eyes remained fixed on her, and after a moment he nodded. "You must be very capable if they assigned you to me," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "My name is Thomas Edwards." Angela smiled politely, noting his steady composure despite his injuries. "Mr. Edwards, I'll be taking care of your vitals and monitoring your progress. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know." Mr. Edwards continued to study her with a look of deep interest. "Thank you, Nurse Richardson," he replied, his tone both courteous and attentive. "And please, call me Thomas." Angela proceeded with her work, carefully recording his vitals and ensuring his medication schedule was on track. She could feel Mr. Edwards watching her every movement, his gaze neither intimidating nor uncomfortable, but rather curious. For a man in his condition, he appeared remarkably calm, his demeanor almost regal. The contrast between Mr. Edwards' quiet strength and Dr. Haynes' stern authority was striking. As she finished her tasks, Mr. Edwards spoke again, his tone conversational yet probing. "How long have you been at Red Oaks?" Angela met his gaze, sensing the question held more weight than it seemed. "A few weeks now," she replied evenly. "It's been an adjustment, but I'm dedicated to the work." "Adjustments can be challenging," he observed, a hint of empathy in his voice. "Red Oaks has a reputation for certain traditional values. I imagine it hasn't been easy." Angela hesitated, unsure of how much she should reveal, but something about Mr. Edwards' directness encouraged her to be honest. "There have been challenges," she admitted, choosing her words carefully. "But I came here to help people, and that's what I intend to do." A flicker of admiration passed across Mr. Edwards' face, and he nodded approvingly. "I see." He paused, his gaze growing thoughtful. "You strike me as someone with a great deal of resilience, Ms. Richardson, and I suspect Red Oaks could benefit from that." Angela managed a small smile, appreciating his kindness. She had encountered so few people in the hospital who truly saw her for who she was, beyond the assumptions and barriers others placed around her. As she prepared to leave, Mr. Edwards offered a parting remark that lingered in her thoughts long after she'd left his room. "Keep doing what you're doing, Ms. Richardson. Sometimes, all it takes is one person's strength to make a difference." Over the next few days, Angela visited Mr. Edwards' room frequently, providing him with care and companionship that seemed to go beyond her usual duties. Each time, their conversations deepened, and Angela found herself speaking freely, sharing her experiences and frustrations, while Mr. Edwards listened intently. He was perceptive, able to pick up on the subtext of her words, and Angela felt a strange sense of relief in his presence. One afternoon, as she was adjusting his IV, Mr. Edwards spoke with a contemplative look in his eye. "Ms. Richardson, do you know who I am?" Angela paused, surprised by the question. "Only that you're an important patient here, sir," she replied honestly. He chuckled, a deep, thoughtful sound. "Well, that's not entirely inaccurate. Let's just say I have certain connections within the healthcare industry." His eyes gleamed with a hint of mystery. "But that's not what I wanted to discuss with you." Angela nodded, curiosity growing as she continued to listen. Mr. Edwards leaned slightly forward, his gaze serious. "I've been observing the dynamics here at Red Oaks, particularly the way you're treated by certain staff members." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In my experience, there's a difference between a place that simply exists and a place that thrives. Red Oaks has the potential to thrive, but only if certain attitudes are addressed." Angela felt a spark of hope at his words. "Do you believe things can change here?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Mr. Edwards regarded her steadily, his expression resolute. "I believe change is not only possible but necessary. And sometimes, it only takes one person willing to stand up for what's right." He gave her a small, encouraging nod. "That person could be you, Ms. Richardson." The weight of his words settled over her, filling her with a mix of hope and apprehension. Angela had always believed in doing what was right, but Red Oaks was an imposing institution with a well-established culture. Standing up to it felt like an insurmountable challenge. As she left Mr. Edwards' room that day, Angela couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. His words resonated deeply, as though he had granted her a permission she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time since arriving at Red Oaks, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. The following week, Angela found herself under even closer scrutiny. Dr. Haynes seemed to take a particular interest in assigning her the most challenging cases, often monitoring her performance with a critical eye. Yet despite the extra workload and Dr. Haynes' increasingly blatant efforts to trip her up, Angela held her ground, determined to excel. One day, while she was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station, she overheard two nurses talking just around the corner. "Did you hear? Richardson was assigned to the VIP patient, Mr. Edwards. "I don't understand what they're thinking," one nurse muttered, her tone dripping with resentment. "I know," the other nurse replied. "She's just a new hire. It doesn't make sense." Angela's grip tightened on the chart, their words piercing her resolve. Despite her best efforts, it was clear that her colleagues viewed her as an outsider, someone unworthy of the responsibility she had been given. But as she straightened up, her determination only strengthened. That afternoon, Angela was called to assist in a high-stakes emergency operation. The patient had been in a severe accident, and the surgical team was tense, aware of the critical nature of the procedure. Angela scrubbed in, ready to do her part. Dr. Haynes was leading the operation, his movements precise and controlled. But as the procedure progressed, Angela noticed a small but crucial detail. He was about to make an incision near a vulnerable artery. Her heart raced. Speaking up in the middle of an operation could jeopardize everything, but if she stayed silent, the patient's life was at risk. Steeling herself, Angela spoke up, her voice calm and steady. "Dr. Haynes, may I suggest a slightly different approach? There's a risk to the artery at this angle." The room fell silent, every eye turning to her. Dr. Haynes glared at her, his jaw tight. For a moment, Angela feared she had overstepped. But instead of dismissing her, Dr. Haynes adjusted his position, carefully following her suggestion. The operation continued without further incident, and as they closed up, the room exhaled collectively, relieved that it had gone smoothly. When the procedure was over, Dr. Haynes turned to her, his face an unreadable mask. "Miss Richardson," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "In the future, I expect you to trust my judgment." Angela met his gaze, unflinching. "Of course, Dr. Haynes." As the days passed, Angela's reputation continued to grow among the patients and a handful of colleagues who were starting to see her for the skilled, compassionate nurse she truly was. Yet, the challenges at Red Oaks remained, each day a test of her resolve. But in the quiet moments, Angela often returned to Mr. Edwards' room, finding solace in their conversations. His presence became a source of strength, his words reminding her that she was capable of making a difference. One evening, as Angela prepared to leave for the day, she stopped by Mr. Edwards' room to say goodbye. He looked up from his book, a faint smile on his face. "Leaving already, Ms. Richardson?" he asked, his tone warm. "Yes, but I'll see you tomorrow," she replied, returning his smile. Mr. Edwards nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Remember, Ms. Richardson, that change often begins with a single spark." Angela left the hospital that evening with his words echoing in her mind. She felt the weight of her journey at Red Oaks, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She had endured the challenges, faced the scrutiny, and remained true to her values. Little did she know that Mr. Edwards was preparing for a confrontation of his own, a confrontation that would soon bring her struggle to the forefront of Red Oaks and change the course of her journey forever. The following days unfolded with an atmosphere of heightened tension, both for Angela and the staff at Red Oaks Medical Center. Though she performed her duties with unwavering dedication, Angela couldn't ignore the growing hostility emanating from Dr. Haynes. He scrutinized her every move, each interaction brimming with a palpable undercurrent of resentment. Even her few allies within the nursing staff had grown distant, afraid to jeopardize their own positions by showing too much support for her. The only sanctuary Angela found was in her visits with Mr. Thomas Edwards. The man's calm demeanor and sharp insights created a sense of relief in her otherwise fraught days. Their conversations became more personal, Mr. Edwards often asking her about her motivations, her dreams, and the many challenges she faced. One afternoon, after Angela had finished administering his medication, Mr. Edwards gave her a considering look. "You seem troubled, Ms. Richardson," he observed, his voice gentle but direct. "Is it Dr. Haynes?" Angela hesitated, caught off guard by his directness. She had never openly spoken of her conflicts with Dr. Haynes, assuming Mr. Edwards might find such personal grievances unprofessional. But the sincerity in his gaze encouraged her to be honest. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dr. Haynes, he's made it clear that he doesn't think I belong here. Every task, every patient feels like a test, and no matter how hard I try, it's never enough." Mr. Edwards nodded thoughtfully, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Do you know why he's threatened by you, Ms. Richardson?" Angela's brow furrowed. Threatened. The idea seemed almost absurd. She was just a nurse, after all, and he was a senior physician with years of experience. "Dr. Haynes has spent his career in an environment where he was rarely challenged," Mr. Edwards explained. "In his world, his authority has gone unchecked for years. People like him fear change, and when they see someone competent, determined, and unwilling to bend under pressure, it unsettles them." Angela considered his words, a new understanding dawning within her. She had always thought her struggle was one of proving herself, of climbing a steep hill to earn her place. But perhaps her very presence, her resilience in the face of adversity, was challenging something much deeper within Red Oaks. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," Angela said quietly, feeling a strange sense of relief. "You've given me a lot to think about." Mr. Edwards' eyes softened, his expression kind yet resolute. "Remember, Ms. Richardson," he said, "sometimes the greatest strength lies in simply refusing to yield." The next morning, Angela arrived at the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose. But as she entered the building, she noticed an unusual amount of activity at the front desk. Hospital administrators moved hurriedly, exchanging tense glances as they whispered to one another. The air was thick with anticipation, and Angela couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. Shortly after clocking in, she was informed that there would be a hospital-wide meeting in the main conference room later that afternoon. Attendance was mandatory, and all staff, including doctors, nurses, and administrative personnel, were expected to attend. A murmur of curiosity and anxiety spread through the hallways as everyone tried to guess what the meeting might entail. Angela continued with her duties, but the upcoming meeting weighed heavily on her mind. She couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with Mr. Edwards. He had hinted at his connections within the healthcare industry, and there was a part of her that suspected he might be more influential than he had let on. By the time the afternoon rolled around, the conference room was filled with staff, their voices a low hum of speculation. Angela sat near the back, surrounded by a mix of familiar faces, some openly hostile, others cautiously curious. Dr. Haynes was seated at the front, his posture stiff and unyielding as he exchanged terse whispers with the hospital administrator, Mrs. Whittaker, a poised woman in her late 50s with a reputation for keeping a tight grip on hospital affairs. The room quieted as Mrs. Whittaker took the podium, her expression one of forced composure. She cleared her throat, scanning the room with a practiced gaze. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her tone steady. "Thank you all for attending this impromptu meeting. We have a very special guest with us today, a patient who, unbeknownst to most of you, holds a significant role within the healthcare sector. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Thomas Edwards, CEO of Edwards Healthcare Solutions." A collective gasp rippled through the room, whispers spreading like wildfire. Angela felt her heart skip a beat as she glanced toward the entrance, where Mr. Edwards entered, dressed in a tailored suit despite the casts on his arms. His calm demeanor was unchanged, but the air of authority he exuded now was unmistakable. The familiar, quietly thoughtful man she'd grown to admire had transformed into a figure of formidable influence. Mr. Edwards walked to the front of the room, his gaze sweeping across the assembled staff. His expression was serious, his eyes briefly meeting Angela's before he turned to address the crowd. "Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker," he began, his voice strong yet measured. "As some of you may know, I checked into Red Oaks a few weeks ago following a skiing accident. During my stay, I've had the opportunity to observe the culture and practices of this hospital firsthand. and what I've seen has been eye-opening." A tense silence settled over the room as Mr. Edwards' words sank in. Angela noticed the color drain from Dr. Haynes' face, his rigid posture betraying a hint of nervousness. "Red Oaks has a reputation for excellence," Mr. Edwards continued, his voice unwavering. "But excellence is not achieved solely through medical knowledge or advanced facilities. True excellence requires integrity, inclusivity, and respect for patients and staff alike. Unfortunately, I have witnessed behavior here that falls short of these standards." He paused, allowing his words to hang in the air. "In particular, I have observed a pattern of discrimination, exclusion, and prejudice that has no place in a modern healthcare institution." A murmur of shock spread through the room, eyes darting between Mr. Edwards and Dr. Haynes, whose face had turned a livid shade of red. Angela could feel the tension thickening, her heart pounding as she realized the depth of what was unfolding. "It has come to my attention," Mr. Edwards continued, "that certain staff members, particularly Nurse Angela Richardson, have faced unwarranted hostility, skepticism, and targeted treatment that speaks to a culture of bias. Ms. Richardson, despite her exemplary skills and dedication, has been treated as an outsider, subjected to scrutiny that is unjust and unfounded." Angela's breath caught, her cheeks flushing as every eye in the room turned to her. She held her head high, feeling a surge of gratitude mixed with a fierce sense of vindication. Mr. Edwards was not only acknowledging her struggle but validating her experiences in front of the entire hospital. Dr. Haynes shifted in his seat, his expression a mix of anger and defiance. Mrs. Whittaker looked visibly uncomfortable, her gaze fixed firmly on her notes. "Effective immediately," Mr. Edwards announced, "Red Oaks Medical Center will be undergoing a thorough investigation into its hiring, promotion, and patient care practices. I will personally oversee this process, and I expect full cooperation from all staff members. Those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will face consequences, and I assure you there will be no exceptions." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket, silence punctuated only by the occasional gasp or murmur. Angela watched as Dr. Haynes' face hardened, his jaw clenched, but he remained silent, his fury simmering beneath a forced composure. Mr. Edwards turned his gaze directly to Dr. Haynes, his expression unreadable. "Dr. Haynes, your record here speaks to years of medical expertise, but expertise does not excuse prejudice. Your actions toward Ms. Richardson and other staff members have been documented, and I strongly suggest you reflect on the values this institution should uphold." Dr. Haynes looked as though he had been struck, his usual arrogance replaced by a stunned silence. He opened his mouth to speak, but a quiet glance from Mrs. Whittaker stopped him. Angela could see the defeat flickering in his eyes, a bitter resignation he could no longer disguise. With his speech concluded, Mr. Edwards stepped down from the podium, his presence commanding a reverent silence. He made his way toward Angela, offering her a small, reassuring nod. Angela felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. For so long, she had fought her battles in silence, questioning her own worth amid the challenges. But now she stood vindicated, her resilience acknowledged in a way she hadn't dared to hope for. As the meeting concluded, the staff filed out in stunned silence, casting glances at Angela filled with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and in some cases, guilt. A few colleagues who had been dismissive or hostile approached her, offering hesitant words of apology. But as Angela looked around, she understood that true change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, persistence, and a willingness to stand firm in the face of resistance. Mr. Edwards approached her, his expression warm and proud. "Ms. Richardson, I think you'll find that Red Oaks is about to experience a transformation." Angela met his gaze, a renewed confidence shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for everything." He smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "It's you who should be thanked, Ms. Richardson. You've shown remarkable courage, and I'm certain your presence here will inspire lasting change." As they walked out of the conference room, Angela felt the weight of her journey lifting, replaced by a powerful sense of purpose. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she knew she was not alone. With allies like Mr. Edwards and the strength she carried within, Angela was ready to face whatever came next. The days to come would reveal the true extent of Red Oak's transformation, and Angela would stand at the heart of it, a beacon of resilience and integrity, determined to reshape the future. The transformation at Red Oak's Medical Center was underway, but the process was anything but smooth. After the explosive meeting led by Mr. Edwards, whispers of change circulated in every corner of the hospital. Staff members who had once dismissed or ignored Angela now found themselves reconsidering their attitudes, though not always with sincerity. Some approached her cautiously, apologizing in half-hearted tones, while others maintained an uncomfortable silence, reluctant to accept that the norms they had clung to were under scrutiny. Angela was acutely aware of the mix of responses. Some colleagues were genuinely trying to bridge the gap, treating her with newfound respect and openness, while others remained guarded, their reluctance palpable. The tension in the air was thick, and Angela knew that even though Mr. Edwards' words had shaken the institution, lasting change would require more than a single speech or mandate. Dr. Haynes, however, remained a formidable presence. Though he had been reprimanded in front of the entire staff, his demeanor toward Angela had shifted from overt hostility to a cold, simmering resentment. He had grown quieter, more guarded, but his gaze was colder than ever. Angela could feel the weight of his anger whenever they passed each other in the halls, his silence a reminder that not everyone was eager to embrace the changes being forced upon them. One morning, Angela was assigned to assist with a high-profile surgery scheduled for one of the hospital's major benefactors. The stakes were high, and the pressure was palpable. This was an opportunity to demonstrate her skills under intense scrutiny, and she knew that her every move would be watched closely by her colleagues, especially Dr. Haynes, who would be leading the surgery. Despite the tension, Angela approached the task with calm determination, refusing to let doubt seep into her mind. As the surgical team scrubbed in, Dr. Haynes cast a cold glance her way. "Miss Richardson," he said, his tone clipped, "I assume you're prepared for the procedure. This is a delicate operation, and we can't afford any mistakes." Angela met his gaze evenly. "I'm fully prepared, Dr. Haynes," she replied, her voice steady. Dr. Haynes raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said before turning away, his focus shifting to the procedure ahead. The surgery began with Angela stationed beside Dr. Haynes, carefully monitoring the instruments and assisting as needed. Her movements were precise, her focus unyielding. Every step of the way, she anticipated the needs of the surgeons, handing over tools before they were even requested. It was a dance of precision, each gesture a testament to her expertise. But midway through the procedure, Angela noticed something that made her heart pound with apprehension. Dr. Haynes was preparing to make an incision that was perilously close to a cluster of nerves. She could see the potential risk, the possibility that a slight miscalculation could lead to nerve damage and affect the patient's mobility. Summoning her courage, Angela spoke up, her tone calm but firm. "Dr. Haynes, I believe the incision may be too close to the nerve. Perhaps a slight adjustment would reduce the risk." Dr. Haynes paused, his face a mask of controlled fury. For a moment, the entire room held its breath, the tension almost palpable. Angela could feel her colleagues' eyes on her, waiting to see how Dr. Haynes would respond. The seconds ticked by, each one a silent eternity. Finally, Dr. Haynes exhaled slowly, his expression a tight-lipped mask. "Noted," he said tersely, adjusting his approach without another word. The surgery proceeded without further incident, but Angela could feel the unspoken hostility radiating from Dr. Haynes. Her intervention had saved the patient from potential harm, yet it was clear that Dr. Haynes saw it as an affront to his authority. When the procedure ended, Angela was gathering her supplies when Dr. Haynes approached her, his tone dripping with thinly veiled contempt. "Miss Richardson," he said, his voice low and menacing. "A word, if you please." Angela followed him to a quiet corner of the prep room, bracing herself for whatever was to come. Dr. Haynes' gaze was icy as he spoke. "Let me make something clear," he began, his voice laced with anger. "You may have managed to earn yourself a temporary spotlight here, but don't think for 1 second that I'll tolerate any further attempts to undermine my authority. You are here to assist, not to question my expertise." Angela met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Dr. Haynes," she replied evenly, "I spoke up because it was in the best interest of the patient. My priority is their well-being, as it should be for all of us." He scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You may think you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing more than a thorn in my side. Don't forget your place." Angela held her ground, her voice unwavering. "My place, Dr. Haynes, is to provide the best care possible, regardless of whose pride is on the line." Dr. Haynes' face twisted in anger, but he said nothing further. Instead, he turned and stalked away, leaving Angela standing alone in the quiet room, her heart racing. She knew the confrontation would only escalate the animosity between them, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. The days passed. Rumors of Dr. Haynes' simmering resentment reached the ears of Mr. Edwards, who took a more active role in the hospital's operations. He began holding regular meetings with hospital staff, assessing the culture, and implementing measures to ensure an inclusive environment. Staff members were now required to attend diversity and sensitivity training, sessions designed to foster understanding and respect among colleagues. One evening, Angela was asked to join Mr. Edwards in his office for a private meeting. She arrived promptly, finding him seated at his desk, his expression thoughtful. "Ms. Richardson," he greeted her warmly, motioning for her to sit. "Thank you for coming." Angela took a seat, meeting his gaze with curiosity. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. How can I help?" He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I wanted to discuss the progress at Red Oaks and hear your perspective on how things have been since we initiated these changes." Angela took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It's been transformative," she said honestly. "I see people making an effort, and there's a noticeable shift in how some of my colleagues treat me. But it's not perfect. There's still resistance, and I think you know where most of it is coming from." Mr. Edwards nodded, his expression serious. "I do. Dr. Haynes has made no secret of his disdain for these changes, and his attitude toward you has been unacceptable. I want you to know that I'm aware of everything he's put you through, and I don't intend to let it continue." Angela looked at him, a mixture of relief and gratitude flooding her. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I appreciate that." He offered her a reassuring smile. "Ms. Richardson, I've seen enough to know that you are more than qualified to be here, and your resilience in the face of adversity has proven your strength. As we move forward, I want you to know that you have my full support." Angela felt a renewed sense of purpose, the weight of her struggle lightened by his words. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. That means a great deal to me." As their conversation concluded, Mr. Edwards extended a formal offer. He wanted Angela to take on a more prominent role in the hospital's diversity initiatives, helping to lead the effort for cultural transformation. Angela accepted the opportunity with a deep sense of responsibility, eager to contribute to the progress she had long dreamed of seeing. In the weeks that followed, Angela found herself at the center of the hospital's cultural shift. Her role now included leading discussions, facilitating training sessions, and providing a voice for those who had previously felt silenced. Her colleagues began to see her not only as a skilled nurse but as a leader, someone capable of guiding them through a new era of understanding and respect. But Dr. Haynes was not one to surrender easily. His resentment simmered, and he continued to undermine Angela's efforts, often speaking in thinly veiled criticisms during meetings or questioning her authority in front of others. His defiance became increasingly apparent, and Angela sensed that a final confrontation was inevitable. One afternoon, Angela was in the break room when Dr. Haynes entered, his eyes narrowing as he saw her leading a group discussion with a few nurses. He lingered by the door, his arms crossed, a look of disdain on his face. When the discussion ended, he approached her, his voice barely concealing his anger. "Miss Richardson," he said, his tone clipped, "I trust you know that these little discussions of yours are a waste of time for real medical professionals. We're here to save lives, not to entertain petty grievances." Angela met his gaze, her calm unwavering. "Dr. Haynes, fostering a respectful and inclusive environment isn't a petty grievance. It's fundamental to our work and to patient care." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You're delusional if you think your little crusade will change anything. People like you." He stopped himself, realizing the implications of his words, but the damage was done. Angela took a step forward, her voice steady but firm. "People like me, Dr. Haynes. You mean people who believe in treating others with respect and dignity. Yes, there are many of us here now, and we're not going anywhere." The room fell silent as other staff members watched the exchange, tension thick in the air. Dr. Haynes' face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Mr. Edwards entered the room, his expression a blend of disappointment and resolve. "Dr. Haynes," Mr. Edwards said quietly, his voice carrying authority, "I think it's time we had a conversation in private." Dr. Haynes stiffened, casting one last, venomous glance at Angela before following Mr. Edwards out of the room. Angela watched them go, her heart racing, knowing that the final showdown she had anticipated was now unfolding. Later that evening, as Angela finished her shift, she received a message from Mr. Edwards asking her to meet him in his office. She entered cautiously, finding him seated at his desk, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Ms. Richardson," he began, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction, "I wanted to let you know that Dr. Haynes has tendered his resignation. He will be leaving Red Oaks effective immediately." Angela felt a rush of relief, a sense of vindication washing over her. The man who had been her greatest obstacle, the embodiment of the hospital's resistance to change, was finally gone. Mr. Edwards smiled, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. "You've shown remarkable courage, Ms. Richardson. Thanks to your resilience, Red Oaks is becoming a place where people can work without fear of discrimination. The changes you've championed are now a part of our foundation." As Angela left Mr. Edwards' office that evening, she felt the weight of her journey lifting, replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment. She had come to Red Oaks as an outsider, a stranger in an unwelcoming world. But through determination, integrity, and courage, she had carved out a place for herself. And in doing so, had paved the way for a new future at Red Oaks Medical Center. The months that followed Dr. Haynes' departure, Red Oaks Medical Center underwent a transformation that extended far beyond its walls. The once rigid, hierarchical culture of the hospital was reshaped, its values redefined. And at the heart of this transformation was Angela Richardson, whose journey from a marginalized new hire to a respected leader had inspired an entire institution. Under Mr. Edwards' guidance, and with Angela's leadership, Red Oaks implemented comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs designed to foster a workplace of respect and unity. Mandatory training sessions became part of each employee's onboarding process, addressing not only surface-level diversity issues, but deeper, more systemic biases. The hospital also established a Diversity and Inclusion Council, on which Angela served as chair, tasked with ensuring that every voice, regardless of background, was heard and valued. Angela's story resonated with the staff, many of whom approached her, some with apologies, others with gratitude. They expressed their admiration for her resilience, her willingness to stand up for what was right, even when the stakes were high. Each time she encountered one of these staff members, Angela felt the barriers of prejudice and misunderstanding slowly breaking down, replaced by a newfound sense of respect and camaraderie. One of the most profound changes came from the nursing staff itself. Many of Angela's colleagues, who had initially viewed her with suspicion or indifference, now looked to her as a role model. Sarah, The nurse who had once been cool and distant became one of Angela's closest allies. The two worked together, designing new protocols to ensure that every member of the nursing team felt supported and valued, especially during challenging shifts. One evening, as Angela and Sarah sat in the break room after a long day, Sarah turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Angela, I need to apologize," she said, her voice earnest. "When you first joined us, I was one of the people who judged you unfairly. I let my own biases and fears cloud my judgment. But you've changed the way I see things. You've taught me more than I could have imagined." Angela placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Thank you, Sarah. It means a lot to hear that. This change we're seeing at Red Oaks, it wouldn't be possible without all of us working together." Sarah smiled, a look of genuine respect in her eyes. "I never realized how much courage it takes to challenge the status quo. But you did it, and we're all better for it." As the two women sat together, their camaraderie a testament to the changes taking root within the hospital, Angela felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come to Red Oaks not just to work, but to make a difference, a mission she had accomplished in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. News of the changes at Red Oaks began to spread beyond the hospital. Healthcare professionals across the region took note, with many curious to learn more about the shift in culture and the impact of the diversity programs that Angela and Mr. Edwards had pioneered. Invitations poured in, inviting Angela to speak at conferences and workshops. She was asked to share her experiences, to shed light on the challenges she had faced and the principles that had guided her journey. One afternoon, Angela found herself at a national healthcare conference, standing in front of an audience of healthcare leaders from around the country. She had been asked to share the story of Red Oaks, to talk about the importance of fostering an inclusive environment where every professional felt empowered to bring their full selves to work. As she stood at the podium, Angela took a deep breath, scanning the audience. "When I first joined Red Oaks Medical Center," she began, her voice steady and confident, "I was met with silence. People were hesitant to work with me, skeptical of my abilities. But what I learned through that experience is that resilience is not just about enduring hardship. It's about using hardship as a catalyst for change." She paused, letting her words sink in. We all have a responsibility, not only to our patients but to each other. Healthcare is a field built on compassion, and that compassion must extend beyond the patients in our care. It must reach our colleagues, our staff, our communities. Angela shared the details of her journey, the struggles she had faced, and the unwavering support of Mr. Edwards. She spoke about the importance of allies, of people willing to stand beside those fighting for change, and of the power of collective action. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several attendees approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph, expressing their gratitude for her courage and leadership. One of them, a young nurse from a hospital in the Midwest, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Richardson," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been going through something similar at my own hospital, and your story, it gives me hope." Angela smiled, feeling the weight of her journey transform into something lighter, something filled with purpose. She placed a reassuring hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Remember, you're not alone. Change may take time, but if we stand together, we can make a difference." Back at Red Oaks, Mr. Edwards continued to implement the new policies with Angela's guidance. They worked closely together, reviewing reports, meeting with staff, and ensuring that the changes were taking root at every level of the hospital. Their partnership became a symbol of Red Oak's new direction, a commitment to integrity, inclusivity, and excellence. One day, as they were wrapping up a meeting, Mr. Edwards turned to Angela with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Angela, I've been thinking, have you ever considered taking on a more permanent leadership role?" Angela looked at him, taken aback. "A leadership role?" she echoed, trying to process the unexpected proposal. He nodded. "I've seen the impact you've had here, the respect you've earned, not just from the staff, but from the patients. I believe that you have the potential to lead not just within Red Oaks, but beyond. With your insight, compassion, and resilience, you could be a powerful force for change across the healthcare field." Angela was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. She had never imagined herself in a formal leadership role, her focus always on patient care. But now, as she considered the possibility, a spark of excitement began to grow within her. This was an opportunity to make a lasting impact, to take the lessons she had learned and use them to create positive change on a larger scale. I would be honored," she finally replied, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I never thought this journey would lead me here." He smiled, a look of genuine pride in his eyes. "You've earned this, Angela, and I have no doubt that you'll continue to inspire those around you." With her new position as Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Red Oaks, Angela's responsibilities expanded, but so did her sense of purpose. She implemented mentorship programs, offering guidance to young professionals from diverse backgrounds who faced similar challenges to those she had once encountered. She worked tirelessly to ensure that every employee felt supported, understood, and valued. Angela's impact extended to the patients as well. Families began to notice the warmth and respect that permeated Red Oaks, the way staff members worked together in harmony, their commitment to care stronger than ever before. Patient satisfaction soared, and Red Oaks became a model institution, a beacon of progressive values and compassionate care. One evening, as Angela was preparing to leave the hospital, she received a call from her mother. They had spoken often over the months, her mother always a source of wisdom and strength. "Angela," her mother's voice was filled with pride, "I heard about your new position. Director of Diversity and Inclusion. That's incredible, baby girl." Angela smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Mama. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me. Your strength, your resilience, it's what kept me going." Her mother's voice softened, a hint of emotion in her tone. "Angela, you've done something remarkable. You didn't just survive, you thrived. You took all the pain, all the struggles, and turned them into something beautiful. I am so proud of you." As they spoke, Angela felt a deep sense of fulfillment, the journey she had undertaken now complete. She had faced prejudice, isolation, and doubt, but through it all, she had remained true to herself, guided by a quiet strength that had carried her through every trial. After ending the call, Angela stood by the window, looking out over the city, the lights twinkling in the distance. Red Oaks was more than just a hospital now. It was a symbol of hope, a place where people could come to heal, not only physically but emotionally and spiritually. And Angela knew that this was just the beginning. Her work at Red Oaks had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to believe in the power of change, to stand up for what was right, even when the odds were against them. And as she looked toward the future, Angela felt a quiet certainty that no matter where her journey led, she would continue to carry that message forward. One of resilience, compassion, and the unwavering belief that every person, regardless of their background, deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. With a final glance at the hospital she had helped transform, Angela walked into the night, her heart filled with purpose, her spirit unbreakable, ready to embrace whatever came next.